Den Vrede Makt is the fourth full-length album from Whoredom Rife. This is a Trondheim, Norway-based black metal band, and probably one of the more solid groups in this style around at the moment. I think that they've done well to develop their own sound over the last 10 years, although most of their first couple of records were just focusing on producing a very classic, straightforward style of pure Norwegian black metal, and they've always had their own finesse, their own atmosphere to it, but they really were coming from a very classic place. They were not messing around with anything out of the ordinary, and the general fellow behind it, V. Einride, is certainly a talent in terms of composing music, and that's kind of the major show of their first several records, which were traditional, yes, but not average. I would compare it to something like Dievel or Take, where you get a sense that the early 90s was the impetus for this sound, but it wasn't pure 1994. It wasn't focused on keyboards too heavily, but there was a melodic component to the structure of most of their songs. And I think there's sort of an early Satyricon touch to a lot of the movement on their first several records. Uh, I paid most attention to Winds of Wrath here because I think it is kind of their best record for that classic style. It was a benchmark set. It was just an incredible record, and the standard was set so high by that album that I wasn't sure that they could top it at that point, just because everything was perfect about that album. The vinyl is just beautiful. On top of that, the art direction, but also the music itself is probably the general peak of focusing on that singular goal of producing the ideal of Norwegian black metal as in their own revision, and that's something to be praised up front because it's such a great record. And I think it's important context for what they're doing a little bit different on this album. So we'll cut to a song here and start to get an idea of what's a bit different here. So right off the bat, I noticed that this album is similar in production values. They've got the same team, the same graphic design. Everything is absolutely just. They've got the look, the sound. Everything is exactly as you would expect of the high quality of Whoredom Rife, and that's all set in place, and that's all beautiful. But the approach of the first couple of previous songs were very different in terms of this being a little bit more atmospheric. The approach of the riffing is a little bit less aggressive and more, there's almost a miserable, morose quality to a lot of it. There's a what I describe as a sorrowful wrath that sets through this album, where there are some more modern atmospheric movements on here, but also still a very classic sound. And so there's more of a differentiation between songs. They flow together differently. It's just about an hour long, and they're never one to strike into melody outright. They're one to build up to a big moment. And I think the way that this album does that is they give you a lot of what's new up front, and they give you a lot of what is very classic on the back half of the record. So there are actually more of the early 90s sounding songs on this record. The deeper you move into it, it becomes a little bit more manic, a little bit more aggressive, and they don't it's almost like the record becomes less pretentious and more bestial over time without actually, working up to like war metal or something like that. So they're depicting something that is dramatic and grand, but also doing it with kind of a bludgeon of riffs on some of these later songs, and there's a lot of energy to it. I think a band like Darvaza does this really well also, but they're maybe a little bit more punkish by comparison on terms of just cutting quick, simpler riffs. So there is still something very elaborate about the way that they present these songs, but they're also maybe a little bit more direct and to the point and cutting in that way. So the record ebbs and flows much more differently than the last one did in this case. And I don't think that'll be, like I say here, I don't think it'll be controversial, but we are getting a different record, something that's maybe a little bit more of their own style, maybe a little bit less tied up by the strictures of Norwegian black metal classicism, but they're still speaking in that voice. And I think it's something that you'll get from a lot of Norwegian black metal that is serious and solid these days, is that they respect the tradition, but they're also putting their own spin on it and authoring something that is not just from somebody else's mouth. So, well above average. This is a high recommendation for me. I think this one has grown over time to a very high recommendation from my point of view, and it's something that I think is essential for this month. Their label has been on a tear all year long, and they're not letting up with this release for sure. Go check it out on May 31st when it releases, and check out my review for more detail in terms of my thoughts.